Question number 2, the Honourable Annette King.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question's to the Prime Minister. What adverse impact on costs and prices, if any, have this government's policies had on New Zealanders?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, on the 28th of April this year, the government increased tobacco excise. This was strongly supported by the Labour Party, which said, and I quote, "This is a huge step forward in health promotion for all New Zealanders." From the 1st of July, a number of sectors, including liquid fossil fuels, came into the emissions trading scheme. This is expected to have an impact on households of around $3 a week, which I might add is about half the cost of the scheme proposed by Labour. The most important thing to look at, however, is the overall change in consumer prices across the economy. The CPI rose only 0.3% in the last quarter, most of this due to tobacco price increases, leaving the annual increase at only 1.8%. Members might like to know that over the last 4 years of the Labour government, inflation was never as low as this. In fact, didn't even come to terms anywhere near this.
The Honourable Annette King.
When he said at the start of June that, quote, "people will be better off, they just don't know it yet," end quote, had he factored in the following price increases that New Zealanders are experiencing right now: power, petrol, rent, mortgages, ACC levies, interest rates, car registration, dairy products, and even the price of the pint? And if not, why not?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I've only got one question. Where on earth was that member? Where on earth was that member within 9 years they were in office? Because let's just run through it.
Order. A point of order has been called.
Mr Speaker, you heard my question. It was absolutely straightforward. And to start off with an answer about the last 9 years of the previous government, it either shows the Prime Minister hasn't got an answer.
The member was done fine up to this point. The member will not use a point of order to make that kind of comment. I think it's helpful when ministers, including the Prime Minister, in answering questions, don't ask a question in response. I'm sure the Prime Minister is perfectly capable of rephrasing the start of that answer. The Honourable Prime Minister.
Okay, Mr Speaker, let's just run through a few things for the education of the Labour Party. Electricity prices rose 2.9% in the year to May 2010. In the 9 years Labour was in office, it rose 72%. Petrol, $1.75 a litre. Back then, when Labour was in office, $2.11 a litre. Emissions trading scheme, yes, added $3 to the average household. Unless Labour's going to be...
Point of order, the Honourable Annette King.
Mr Speaker...
Order! No order. The member is perfectly at liberty to call a point of order and it will be heard in silence.
Mr Speaker, and this might be a very good Wednesday debate speech from the Prime Minister.
I want to hear the point of order.
But it does not address the question I asked the Prime Minister. No, he was answering about what Labour did. I asked about what this government did, not about what Labour did.
I'll hear the Honourable Drew Brownlee.
Mr Speaker, the questioner stood up and read a list of various activities across the economy claiming that the costs had risen for New Zealand households. It was only reasonable that the Prime Minister then compare what those costs are now compared to what they were under the previous government. And the result, sir, is a shocking indictment on the opposition.
No. Likewise, that honourable member had been fined to that point. We will not use points of order to introduce political debate. I've got to say to the Honourable Annette King, in fairness, that if I recollect her question correctly, she asked how the Prime Minister either explained or justified saying New Zealanders would be better off given a list of price increases. Now, the Prime Minister answered it in a relative fashion. He identified certain price increases but compared them with what had happened previously, and therefore I think was arguing relatively people are better off. Now, that was his answer. It's not my business to judge it, but I think the member's vulnerable to that kind of answer when she asks that kind of question. The Honourable Annette King.
Mr Speaker,
point of order,
Mr Speaker, you may not have noticed part of my question was, had he factored in price increases that New Zealanders are experiencing now? And that was my question, and that was the basis of my question.
But in fairness, I think the way the member started a question was about something to do with people being better off. The Prime Minister making a comment that people would be better off. And the Prime Minister, I think, was arguing that people are relatively better off. And that's his right to argue that in response to a question like that. The honourable member, though, of course, has further supplementary
question. In light of that answer, then, what will be left of most New Zealanders' tax cuts when GST goes up by 20% on the 1st of October, which will further push up the cost of rates, of power, of rent, of food, of petrol, of school uniforms, the cost of building a house, a block of cheese, and even the humble postage stamp? And has he asked New Zealanders the question he liked to ask in 2008, do you feel better off?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, the answer to the question is someone on the average wage will be about $15 a week better off, and the average family will be about $25 a week better off. But what I can say, Mr Speaker, is come 1 October 2010, what will happen to New Zealanders is they'll say, gosh, we must have a national government because we've had two rounds of tax cuts and we waited 9 years and never got one under Labor.
The Honourable Annette King.
Is he concerned about the continued cost his government is putting on to small businesses, which has led Cameron Brewer of the Newmarket Retailers Association to say, good old national supporter I believe, he said the past 18 months have been really hard on retailers. The last thing they now want to do is to increase their prices to help out inland revenues, tax gathering, and while confidence remains flat, it paints a challenging environment for business.
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I haven't spoken to Cameron Brewer about the matter, but what I can say is this. This government is delivering on October 1 a $4.3 billion personal tax cut, funded in part by a $2 billion increase in GST. If that party wants to go and take $4 billion worth of tax cuts off New Zealanders, they should let us know.
Mr Speaker. Well, does he agree with...
There's not, we cannot hear the Honourable Member. I apologise for interrupting, but a little respect, please, as we hear his supplementary question. The Honourable Annette King.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does he agree with budget advisors who are telling families to grow their own vegetables and take in borders in order to be able to make ends meet with the rising cost of food, of power, of petrol, of phone rentals, car registration and so on? And what will they face? What extra will they face after they have a GST increase on the 1st of October?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I do agree with budget advisors when they say that people should do everything they can to make ends meet. That makes sense. And what I'd also agree with is this point, and that was food prices fell 2% at the recent record. That is the biggest fall since records began in 1960.
Question,
the
Mr.
Honourable
Speaker.
Annette King.
What is his understanding of the current price of 2 litres of standard milk, a 1 kg packet of Wheat Bix and the loaf of white toast bread, and how much cold hard cash will struggling families have to pay after these basic items are increased with GST on the 1st of October?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, my understanding is they'll be much more affordable when the tax cuts come on October 1.
Dr Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Prime Minister...
Order. Look, I just asked both front benches, please. I've called a member at the back, well, towards the back of the House, and can't be heard through those kind of interjections. Dr Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Prime Minister, does he agree that Cabinet's decision not to lower the allowable blood alcohol content for driving for those aged 20 years and over will have costs on New Zealanders in more accidents and lives lost? And if so, will he support giving his MPs a conscience vote on a Green amendment to his upcoming road safety legislation to lower allowable blood alcohol content to 0.05 for all drivers aged 20 years and over?
Order. I really think that while I appreciate the member tried to align the question to impact on costs, I think in substance the question was miles away from the primary question. That I'll hear Dr Russell Norman, indeed. Point of order.
The issue is about costs on New Zealanders and adverse impacts on costs of New Zealanders. If there are more car accidents as a result of government policy, which is the arguable point, there will be more costs on New Zealanders.
Well, let me deal with this matter that's raised first before I hear the Honourable Leader of the House, and that is, if we take the question very strictly, it talks about the past, the policies it says, if any, have this government's policies had on New Zealanders. There's been no change. The impact of no change in blood alcohol is certainly not impacted on New Zealanders as yet. So I think there are a range of reasons why I think the question is wide of the mark. I don't want to take a question off the member, though. So if the member wants, I'm happy